Okay, it's time to talk about President Donald Trump's executive order, which places a temporary hold on immigration from 7 countries in the Middle East, which were deemed by the Obama administration to pose a national security risk to the United States. Now, what's hilarious about trying to engage in this discourse is that because I have called it for what it is, I'm apparently a bigot. If you call this executive order anything short of a humanitarian crisis or a ban on all Muslims, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're a xenophobe, you're an Islamophobe, you're a fascist, and every other insult that has been used over the past couple of years to describe anybody who's not on the political left. The problem with this, of course, is that the same people who are hurling these insults are the same ones who have not actually read the executive order. How many of your friends virtue signaling on Facebook do you honestly think sat down, read the executive order, and analyzed it before trying to engage in any sort of debate? I would argue a very tiny fraction of these people have actually tried to analyze this for themselves. And that therein is the more philosophical problem with political discourse within the United States recently. Nobody is forming their own opinions anymore. Every opinion that you're getting is secondhand information. How many people are actually going to the primary sources and analyzing things for themselves, coming up with their own opinions? I think a very tiny fraction of Americans are actually doing that, and that is a great travesty to any sort of political debate within the country. What people are doing instead is they're just regurgitating what they hear on the news, what their friends are saying, what they hear on the radio. It's absolutely pathetic to me that people still romanticize journalism as infallible and the ultimate source of reason and knowledge within our society, as if everything you read on the news is held to some sort of ethical and objective standard. Let me spoil it for you, it's not. But there are still people that walk around with their nose up in the air, claiming intellectual superiority because they read news articles. We've all had that coworker that likes to brag about how he reads the New York Times every morning with his cup of coffee, as if that makes him more well-informed than anybody else. In fact, it doesn't. He's just reading people's opinions. He's not actually analyzing events. He's not actually analyzing legislation. He's not actually scrutinizing things. He's just propagating other people's opinions. If you think that the main purpose of news organizations is unbiased reporting of events corroborated by evidence, you are living in another planet. Who is going to click on a news article that says Donald Trump is concerned about national security and proposes changes to immigration policy? Nobody. However, who is going to click on an article that says, boom! In the biggest humanitarian crisis of the century, Donald Trump is banning all Muslims to die in their war-torn countries. You won't believe what happens next. People are going to click on that. They're going to Facebook about it. They're going to go on a Twitter storm about it. They're going to talk to their coworkers about it. They're going to go out in the streets and throw rocks at buildings. People are going to freak out about it. They're going to get divided. They're going to spark a national debate. And what's that debate going to lead to? More people looking up the event, clicking on links, ultimately generating ad revenue for the news organization that put out the article to begin with. It's not that hard to see, and it's very unfortunate that journalism has deteriorated to this point. So I would encourage you to go out and actually read the executive order. One of the most powerful tools we have available to us as a society in terms of debate is the fact that each and every one of us is equipped to go out and analyze these sources for ourselves, come up with our own opinions. Right now we are stuck in a partisan discussion in which Donald Trump is either Hitler or he's the God Emperor. Apparently there's no in between, and that is the problem. There are 325 million people in the United States. Imagine what a powerful discussion we could be having right now if everyone went out and formed their own opinion on something. With all that out of the way, I actually want to speak about the executive order. People are outraged because they think it's a ban on Muslims or non-white people from ever entering the United States, and that is most certainly not the case. In fact, the executive order has very little to do with immigration. Its main purpose is to establish a more appropriate vetting system for people wanting to come into the United States. Donald Trump and all of his voters want a more secure manner of vetting people and making sure they have the interests of the country in mind, that they're not coming here for other purposes, that they're not coming here to commit terrorism. What is wrong with wanting to scrutinize migrants a little bit more closely to make sure that they are who they say they are? Terrorist organizations have come out and said that they want to exploit the migrant situation to import their fighters into Western Europe, into Scandinavia, into the United States. So what's wrong with wanting to put a better system in place to vet them appropriately? In fact, it would even help out the refugees. That way, if there was a more secure system in place, people wouldn't be as skeptical of migrants coming into the country. The main counter-argument against this is that there is already a very secure process in place for refugees and migrants, but people fail to provide evidence for that. In fact, the best they can do is provide some anecdotal evidence. Oh, a whistleblower at the State Department said that there is already a very secure system in place, proof that Donald Trump is a racist. Yes, there is a system in place currently, but it is not 100% effective. It can be improved on. It needs to be improved on. These are changing times, and the enemy is trying to exploit openings, any opening they can find. It makes sense to want to secure our immigration process, and a temporary halt on immigration of up to 120 days is not that much to ask. Currently, the first step for a refugee coming into the United States is to go through the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. They will ultimately recommend to the United States who is and who is not an appropriate refugee or displaced person. This is the same commission that allowed fighting-age men who had fought in Syria to come into France as refugees and commit the Bataclan Theater Massacre, one of the worst events in French history. So please don't tell me that the system we have in place currently is effective and is working and does not need any sort of reform. The other component of this executive action that often gets left out in the shadows is the fact that Donald Trump did not have much to do with the decision as to which 7 countries are ultimately going to experience this halt in immigration. In fact, it was the Department of Homeland Security under the Obama administration that submitted this list for review. The 7 countries listed are Iraq, Iran, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, and Libya. Yes, these are all predominantly Muslim countries, but there is something else that they all have in common. With the exception of Iran, all of these countries are countries that were endlessly bombed by the Obama administration. 100,000 drone strikes during his presidency. Do you think that it's a coincidence that all these places that were decimated with Hellfire missiles are the same ones that ended up on a list of possible national security risks? I don't think so. Do you think that the people of these countries may have some degree of resentment towards the United States after being forced to clean up little Muhammad's lungs and spleen from their front street? There is a visceral response that these people may have upon hearing the name United States of America, and rightfully so. We have gone there, we have destroyed their homeland, and now we're saying, come over here. Not even to mention the cultural differences. Do you think these people are going to assimilate well within a Western culture? Maybe if we bring them in appropriately after a proper system is placed. But if you're just bringing in thousands upon thousands of people and placing them in small-town America, do you honestly think there is a good hope of assimilation? Do you think that the British, after bombing the civilian population of Berlin, should have opened up their borders and let all the Germans come into the United Kingdom? I don't think so. It's the same principle here. It's the same principle. Donald Trump is trying to clean up the mess made by the Bush administration and the Obama administration. And let's throw Hillary Clinton and the State Department in there. This is a giant mess, and therein lies the hypocrisy. The people who are standing up now calling Donald Trump Hitler for instating a temporary halt to immigration to 7 countries were nowhere to be seen when Obama was bombing 6 of those countries, when he was obliterating the civilian population in the crossfires. Apparently, it's more racist to go and try and fix the problem than it is to actually bomb these people and kill them. And again, part of the problem is the news media. When Obama was in office, he was the savior of Western civilization. He could do no wrong. He was a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. So when he goes and he bombs people and civilians die and little kids are splattered on the streets and their guts are hanging from trees, there's no news story there. There's nothing to report. And that is part of why people never actually complained about it, because they weren't even informed about it. But even if they were, it's Obama. He can do no wrong. However, when Donald Trump does anything, it's wrong. It doesn't matter. Anything that Donald Trump does is going to be criticized by the left. He will not do a single positive thing in their eyes. And that's just the way that things get reported. That's why I again encourage you to turn off your television, go out and examine the primary sources for yourself, analyze the facts for yourself, come up with your own opinions. Don't listen to somebody that gets paid a 7-figure salary to tell you what they think about something. Another topic of debate about the executive order is the legality of it, and I think I'm going to devote a separate video entirely to that issue, but I want to touch on it here. People are screaming that it's illegal and that it's unconstitutional, yet they have no evidence for this. Where in the Constitution does it say that the president has any power over immigration or is barred from any power over immigration. There is no constitutional article or amendment that even addresses the issue. The closest thing you'll get is the 14th Amendment, which is mainly dealing with naturalization, not immigration. It's an amendment that was placed in order to protect former slaves. It says that people born into the United States or naturalized have the same rights as citizens of the country. It says nothing about the executive power over immigration. So to say that it's unconstitutional is just plain wrong. In fact, the majority of the executive powers over immigration come from other pieces of legislation. Notably, the most famous one is what you've probably heard as called the INA, or the Immigration and Nationality Act. This was passed in 1965, and interestingly, prior to that, immigration was focused on bringing people that were culturally similar into the United States, people from Western Europe. After this act was passed, immigration tended to focus a little bit more on Africa and Asia. Also, what's kind of hilarious, but really ultimately sad, is that homosexuals were classified as a sexual deviant and were given no preference into immigration into the United States. Thankfully, this was fixed later on in the Immigration Act of 1990, which kind of removed that. But it also passed something else which is detrimental, which was it removed the English testing for naturalization, which I think is terrible because I think part of immigrating into a country is the expectation that the person will assimilate and have similar values towards freedom. But that's a topic for another discussion as well. Now, many presidents have used their executive power to reform immigration. Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton. All of these presidents have used their executive power to change immigration in the country. Most famously, Barack Obama in 2011 dramatically decreased visas to Iraq for 6 months, a much longer period of time than Donald Trump is proposing in his executive order. Where's the outrage there? Were people crying racism when Obama did that? I don't think so. In fact, he was doing it for a reason that Donald Trump is trying to prevent from happening with his own executive action. Barack Obama in 2011 decreased the visas to Iraq because 2 Iraqi nationals who came into the United States as refugees were discovered by the FBI to be wanting to send aid overseas to terrorists and also plotting to commit terrorism within the United States. Thankfully, they were stopped before they could do anything. People will say that this is completely different than what Donald Trump is proposing because it's only one country and it's not a complete halt to immigration. But it is the same thing. It is the same thing. Barack Obama considered the national security interests of the country, and he used his powers as an executive to change immigration policy temporarily. The exact same thing that Donald Trump is doing now. From a legal standpoint, Donald Trump is very well acting within his powers. All of these judges that are trying to say that Donald Trump is overstepping his bounds are fools. They are trying to gain political points. They are not being objective. They are trying to push their own political agenda, which is a travesty because the court should be the high point of reason within the country. And when you throw objectivity out the door and you impart your own political biases into something, that is a problem. And that is exactly what the courts are doing. They are trying to ride this political wave and gain favor with people who think Donald Trump is a racist instead of applying the law appropriately. There is nothing illegal or unconstitutional about what Donald Trump is doing, and again, I'm going to devote a separate video entirely to this issue. Another argument that critics will make is that no migrant has committed an act of terrorism. And to that I say, look at the Boston Marathon bombing. Those were 2 Chechnyan nationals. They came here to the United States on tourist visas and then claimed asylum. Look at the Bataclan Theater massacre in France. All of those people had fought in Syria. Some of them had come over claiming to be refugees, and then they butchered all those French people. Look at the attack in Nice, France, a Tunisian national, killing more people, claiming more lives. More importantly than that, you have to consider the long-term consequences of this migration policy. It's not as simple as, oh, it's either a migrant or it's not. You have to think about the assimilation that happens. If you look at all the recent terrorist attacks, if they were not directly migrants to another country, they were sons of migrants. Take a look at Charlie Hebdo. The perpetrators of that attack were born to Algerian immigrants. Look at San Bernardino, that crazy guy that went and shot up all his office mates. He was the son of Pakistani immigrants. His wife was Pakistani, but he himself was born in the United States. Doesn't change the fact that his parents were Pakistani. Look at the Pulse nightclub shooting. Afghan parents. People like to say that that was not a terrorist attack. He was an American citizen. He was born to Afghan parents, and that is the problem. There's a problem with assimilation. Just because somebody has come over to this country doesn't necessarily mean they're going to embrace Western values. Do you think that just because somebody moved from one patch of dirt to another, that their ideology is completely going to change? I don't think so. In fact, one of those terrorists said something along the lines of, "America will not isolate me from my Islamic duty, only death will do us part." There is a long-term problem with assimilation that is generational. Something else that is lost beneath the mountain of insults of xenophobia and racism is the fact that Donald Trump has actually offered pragmatic solutions to the humanitarian crisis in the Middle East. He is trying to clean up the mess made by the Bush and Obama administrations. Donald Trump has met with leaders in that area, most notably the King of Saudi Arabia, and together they came up with an agreement to establish safe zones in Yemen and in Syria so that these refugees can go and feel safe. That is a much more appropriate long-term solution to stabilizing the Middle East. What do you think would happen if we just started importing migrants into Scandinavia, Western Europe, the United States? Number one, that would create a huge cultural conflict. These people have different values than we do, and that is totally okay, but we have to recognize that the Islamist way of life is not compatible with Western values. These people have a very difficult time assimilating, especially when they're brought in by giant numbers into the Western world. But more importantly, what do you think would happen to the Middle East if we left it to the more radical fringes of Islam? If we left it to ISIS? If we left it to Islamofascists? What do you think would happen if we just got all of these migrants and took them out of the area and left it in complete chaos? Iran would have a field day. They would sweep into the area and sponsor radical governments. Iran would have the open opportunity to become a superpower within the Middle East. They're already on the way there, but this would only accentuate their influence. No, you can't just simply bomb the Middle East and then take out a bunch of refugees and leave it in complete chaos to the radical fringes of society. You can't do that. That's not an appropriate solution. Donald Trump has offered pragmatic approaches to stabilizing the area, but nobody wants to talk about it. They want to talk about how racist he is because he doesn't want migration from those countries until there is a proper vetting system in place. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. So please, don't lecture me about how much more tolerant you are for calling Donald Trump Hitler because of his proposed national security interests, just because you gave Barack Obama a Nobel Peace Prize for bombing Doctors Without Borders in Afghanistan.